Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talk the Walk with the Boss Rush Network. I don't know where Eddie V could be. Maybe he went somewhere related to the game that we're going to be talking about, which I really hope he didn't, because that would not be good. But joining me today is Christian from the Franchise Festival. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you were actually on one of our episodes with your friends, Hamilton and Spencer, who also co-host the Franchise Festival podcast. And I interviewed y'all for the 1v1 series about a year ago. Yeah,
almost exactly a year ago.
So would you like to tell listeners a little bit about Franchise Festival?
Oh, sure. Yeah, lots happened in a year. We cover noteworthy video game series from the last 40 years. We do it each season is a franchise, hence the name. So the first season that we did was Legend of Zelda. We covered that from January 2020 to about June 2021, and then we moved on to Resident Evil, which we've been covering for the last year and are going to be wrapping up, I think, this December 2022. We don't know what we're going to cover for season 3 yet. We've been having feverish discussions about it. But we have a lot of fun discussing the history of how those got made, as well as walking through like the plot and gameplay. We try to make it just as appealing for somebody who hasn't played the game as somebody who has. And we've gotten some good feedback on that.
And I can attest, because I'm a listener and a patron of theirs, that they are very thorough episodes. They cover the gameplay, they cover the history of the game, the making of the game, the setting, the story, the lore. I believe Hamilton's our lore guy.
He is. We're really blessed with having 3 very different specializations represented on the show. I'm kind of the nuts and bolts, how did this get made guy. Spencer has a mind like a trap for gameplay details. I don't know how he does it, but he can relate them in such a way that it makes sense even if I've never played a game. And then Hamilton, as our lore guy, he gets really into the nitty-gritty of the storyline.
And I love that. That's just kismet right there.
It is. We're so lucky, yeah.
Well, I know that you are a big fan of history as well. And I'm really happy you reached out to me, because Eddie and I like to have at least one other person, no more than about 4, for these Talk the Walk episodes, which, if this is your first time listening, we're a podcast part of the Boss Rush Network where we talk about walking simulators. And we've also delved into visual novels, where I joke that we're taking a break from walking so much to sit down and read, quote unquote.
A reading simulator.
That's a reading simulator.
Read the walk.
Read the walk,
yeah.
And I put out a call on Twitter, is anybody interested in discussing Sagebrush? And Chris reached out to me saying, oh, yeah, I have that game, and I've been meaning to play it, and this will be the impetus to play it.
Yep.
I'm so excited. Okay.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to playing this for quite a while. I'd heard such good things about it, and it's on the Switch. So I had a copy of that from a sale a while back and had just been looking for a reason to play it, and this came at the right time. Okay,
so you played it on the Switch.
I sure did, yeah.
Okay. I played it on PS4, so I'm curious if we had any differences in that.
I wonder that myself. The performance on the Switch is broadly very good, and it scales well. It's not one of those games that has tiny text, so it scales well to playing portably as well. It doesn't have a ton of audio, so if you play it, the main thing that you'd miss playing it without headphones in or that sort of thing portably is like the voiceover, but they're pretty spare. The one thing that I do wonder though is Switch. I guess the frame rate is kind of maybe around like 30 frames per second, and I did wonder if it ran a little smoother on the PS4. But even as somebody who has trouble with motion sickness at low frame rates, this never gave it to me. So I think it's a good fit for that platform.
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know. It's also, I have actually everything listed, but I don't even know if I set the game. We've been jumping into conversations. In fact, poor Christian and I were actually talking for about half an hour about life in general.
I didn't realize it had been that long. We were in the green room for a minute. Wow.
We just get along so well and have so much to talk about. And I would love to meet up with all my internet friends in real life one day.
Wouldn't that would be nice?
Awesome. Hey, y'all, you want to go grab some coffee this evening?
Exactly.
Something like that. But we were talking about Sagebrush, and this game, as Christian called it before we started discussing It was a trigger warning the game.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to let you know that this game does deal with religious suicide, cultism, sexual abuse, and murders. So if any of those topics make you very uncomfortable, I don't recommend listening to this episode, or maybe come back to it later if you've played the game and you feel more comfortable. So, Chris, do you have a fascination with cults?
Strangely enough, I don't. I feel like I'm the only person in the world who doesn't, which makes me kind of a funny fit for this game, I guess. I'm as interested in them as the average person is, right? Like it's like a lot of things where there's kind of like an insular community or a compulsion or that sort of thing. Like it reminds me of like there's a lot of human psychology tied up in it, right? And so I think of like sort of the same things that happen with substance abuse. Their cults are psychologically interesting insofar as they act on people's kind of weakest moments sometimes and just take advantage of people, which is very unfortunate and grim. And as you know, as a person who's really interested in history myself, I think it's interesting just how consistent they have been across time and space. Like these little cults have popped up all the way since the written record exists. So there is something about our nature that makes us inclined in that direction. And so, yeah, I have an interest, but maybe not a fascination.
So are you someone who seeks out the documentaries or anything about certain cults?
I specifically avoid them.
Really? Oh, is
They
it
make
because
me nervous. Like they make me nervous.
nervous?
Yeah, something about cults just I don't know, like they creep me out, and I guess it stands to reason they're a scary subject, but it's kind of like true crime to me. I tend to avoid true crime. I'm a news junkie, so I'm really tied into like news and an awareness of current events. And so a lot of the time in my like recreation time, I tend to favor things that are a little more fantastical. So I broadly those cult documentaries, as good as I have heard they are. Where do you fall on these, Celeste?
I haven't watched any in a little while, but it is fascinating. I do find cults fascinating for the psychological reasons that you named, and the patterns are all very similar, right?
Yep.
They usually prey on people who feel like they're missing something in their lives, or people who need help, do not have a strong connection with other people usually. But and we will see in Sagebrush, there are a variety of personalities who joined this cult. And that's why I made a bit of a tongue-in-cheek joke that Eddie is not with us today, and I hope it's not for the reason of joining a cult. The cult of work, unfortunately, for him.
Yeah. The cult that has us all wrapped around its finger.
Yes, and one day I hope to get out. One day. But I do like watching documentaries whenever I have the chance and reading about them. I just haven't, not because I haven't wanted to, I just haven't come across any yet. But a few years ago, my boyfriend and I did watch one on Jonestown, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That's a big one.
Yeah, one of the most famous ones. I believe that's where the old like Kool-Aid references come from. Was the Jonestown incident? Yeah.
Correct. And did you know that that's actually inaccurate because they apparently drank
Flavor Aid. It was Flavor Aid. Yeah. The poor Kool-Aid man caught all the heat from that, and he wasn't even there.
That one, yes. So let's get started with Sagebrush. A little background. So. I came across this game because my boyfriend said, "Hey, you like cults?" And I found this game on the PlayStation that you might like. It's called Sagebrush. And I played it a few years ago. It's a very short game. You can complete it in about, it says 60 minutes to 120 minutes, but I'm someone who likes to read everything. And sometimes I have to put a game down to go take care of real life things. I think it took me about maybe 3 hours. How long did it take you, Chris?
That's about the same for me. I was going to say about 2.5, but then last night I finished it up, and the final act of it took longer than I was expecting. So I'd say about 3 hours in the end.
Yeah, it's a short game though, and if you watch Let's Plays of it, some people complete it in about an hour, 15 minutes.
It's a good game for a Let's Play too. Like it's a narrative first, yeah.
Yes. So that's a good question. So if you are watching a Let's Play, do you prefer commentary or do you prefer no commentary?
It depends on the purpose that I'm watching it for, truth be told. If I want something kind of uh like if I want something on in the background on like a Friday evening and I'm just sitting around playing a game and my wife and I don't have anything else to watch, I like a Let's Play with commentary.
Mhm.
But if I'm watching one for research, for a podcast, or to get kind of the balance of a game that maybe I'm interested in but don't want to play myself, I tend to prefer them without commentary.
Yes, that's exactly how I feel. I needed to watch a Let's Play of this to help refresh my memory
Hmm.
of this game and to help me remember hey, I remember this certain segment. Let me hurry up and go to this so I don't have to load up the game and try to remember where it was. So I do
Right.
enjoy the lack of commentary. And like you said, this game is so narrative that it's perfect for that.
Hmm.
And so this game was developed by Redact Games. And what's interesting about this is it was the sole project of Nathaniel/Nate Behrens, an indie developer from Michigan. This is an ambitious project, and I applaud him.
It really is. So he did all of, I guess, all of it then, like the
He
the
did.
visuals and the story and everything.
Yeah, and while I was eating breakfast this morning, I was reading a written interview with him where he's talking about the entire process, and I can send it to you after this
Yeah,
if
I'd
you'd
be
like to
curious
read
to read
it.
it. Yeah.
He's a video producer at a college by day, and he was
Hmm.
using his nights and weekends to make this game in a year and a half.
What? Wow, what a treat. Like that. I feel lucky for him having had the inclination to do that. That I'm sure that took so much work. And I'm looking him up on itch.io right now. He's
Hmm.
got maybe 6 or 7 other games as well. They look kind of slimmer
Hmm.
than Sagebrush. But it looks like he contributed something to the Haunted PS1 demo disc, which I don't know if you've encountered that, but that's a hoot and a
I
half.
have. I have not. Is that a scary game?
Yes, it's I mean they're varying levels of horror, but it's they must be on their third one right now, but it's and it makes sense with how Sagebrush looks, as I'm sure we'll get around to. But they're these kind of lo-fi games made in the style of like the 32-bit era, like the PlayStation 1. And I guess just about every year, I think it's on a pretty annual basis. Whoever the central figure in this is will collect maybe 9 to 12 of these little bite-size quote unquote games. Sometimes they're demos of larger things. Sometimes they're just standalone experimental bits. They are all united by that lo-fi aesthetic and horror, though the kind of horror that they are differs. Sometimes they're like a survival horror Resident Evil style game, or sometimes I played one that was like it was like a riff on Tony Hawk, but it was very unsettling and it was set in like a downtown area at night and it just got darker and darker as you skateboarded around. They're just these very experimental, strange little projects. And so it looks like Redact Games contributed to one of them.
Good for you, Nate. I would love to. I think I'm
Yeah,
going to have to reach out to him to interview him if he's
please do. I would love to hear more from this guy. He's got quite a CV there.
it. It's fascinating, and I love seeing people challenge themselves because he
Hmm.
said that his strengths lie in the story writing and the more technical aspects were his biggest hurdle, which is probably,
Yeah.
I think he mentioned in the interview that that is why he chose to do the lo-fi poly for this game. But you can get,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, you wanted to say anything about the graphics, Chris?
Oh, I thought it ended up being a really nice choice. Like it's interesting that it was a matter of expediency for him because
Hmm.
it I think it ends up contributing to the feel of the project. I think doing this in a different visual style wouldn't be as effective.
I agree. And you can play this game on Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Microsoft Windows, Linux, Macintosh operating systems. This game was released September 18th, 2018. And here's a summary from the website for it. Sagebrush is a first person narrative adventure about exploring the compound of an apocalyptic millennialist cult in remote New Mexico years after they collectively took their lives in a mass suicide event. In Sagebrush, you'll investigate the long-abandoned Black Sage Ranch, the former home of Perfect Heaven, an apocalyptic cult formed in the early 1990s under the guiding hand of the prophet Father James. So this game was also inspired by real-world apocalyptic cults. He did extensive research into cult groups, both famous and obscure, large and small, and his goal was to make sure he really made you feel like you understood the characters and that they were more complex than just, I'm super religious, or
Right.
gosh, I loved it. He avoids simplistic motivations and easy answers in this game. The members of the flock, which is what the cult members are called, the flock, they are diverse and complex people with varied needs, hopes, and fears. So which cults did you think of while you were playing this game?
My mind immediately went to which is the one that was in Guyana? Was that Heaven's Gate?
Oh, that is Jonestown.
That was Jonestown. Okay, I always get Heaven's Gate and Jonestown mixed up. Yeah, Jonestown was the one that I first went to. Obviously, this ended up having a more inwardly directed self-destruction as opposed to Jonestown, which harmed people outside of the cult as well. But that was just what my mind first went to.
Yeah, and Heaven's Gate is another one I thought of, which we didn't talk about that one too much, but I believe that one happened in the U.S.
Yeah.
And gosh, I don't remember the name of the leader.
Hard to keep them straight.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was, I believe that was in the 80s or 90s, and the members did commit mass suicide, but they all wore these jogging suits, these identical jogging suits.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that. That really tarnished, I want to say it might have been the tennis shoes in particular that they wore. I want to say were a particular company, and it kind of tarnished that company's name for years, strangely enough, even though obviously they hadn't had any specific connection to it. But
they didn't supply them.
No, yeah, they didn't have some agreement with the Heaven's Gate cult.
Which I think it's interesting that they chose the name Perfect Heaven for the name of this cult. It's probably a play on Heaven's Gate.
It must be. Yeah, that's what I thought of when I saw that they were called Perfect Heaven. I thought Heaven's Gate.
Exactly. Now, another one I thought of either yesterday or today with, as you'll see later in the game, there are a lot of weapons. Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the one that had the big FBI raid, I think, in the end, wasn't it?
Gosh, I was reading about, they have a series, speaking of, I need to watch it. There's a series called Waco, which deals with this, which I haven't watched yet. David Koresh was the leader. And it was this compound in Waco, Texas. And I don't know if it was the FBI or the Department of Alcohol.
Yes, I think you're ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yes.
I think it may have been the ATF that ended up raiding it, and it was a real disaster. They had one of those. There's an overlap between kind of militia groups and cult groups, and they're sometimes separate, but there's a Venn diagram overlap there, and so Waco was one of those examples where there was a pretty big overlap.
Yes. That's an interesting one, because usually with cults, it's like, okay, the cult is the bad guy, and everyone else who's trying to help the cult members, they are all good guys. But Waco, there's a lot of gray area with that one.
Exactly.
Some people say that. I think that David Koresh was accused of sleeping with minors and grooming them. That was a big deal. But then the government really didn't have proof or sufficient proof. So some people say that the government overstepped, and I think they died by fire.
Yeah. I guess, again, kind of to bring it back here to Sagebrush, there is a big kind of it feels like he's definitely pulling from Waco as well, and the time frame fits as well. Waco occurred in the mid 1990s, and this game is set in the mid 1990s. Although, yeah, I think there is still some lack of clarity around exactly. Don't quote me on this, listeners. Research this yourselves. But I do recall that there was some lack of clarity around how exactly that fire got started, whether it was through the direct actions of the ATF or through uh, like a self-destructive attack by the Branch Davidians inside the compound, and so there's a lot of gray and kind of questions still surrounding that, but it was a pretty big scandal for the government at the time.
Yes, and I believe Ruby Ridge is related to that. Is that correct?
I don't recognize that name.
Oh gosh, and of course now that I'm on the spot, I'm blanking. My mind is blanking.
Isn't that the way?
I don't. Gosh, so Christian, I am 33. I think you're of that same age
I'm
group.
34. Yeah. How about
Okay,
that? Yeah.
I believe when I was reading about Waco, Texas,
Hmm.
that and the Ruby Ridge incident inspired the Oklahoma City bombing.
I know Waco played a role in the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah, that was part of what's his name's
Timothy,
manifesto. Yeah,
Timothy
Timothy
McVeigh.
McVeigh. Sure enough, that's his
So
name.
you remember that name? Like I remember hearing. I mean, I was a very young child, but I
Yeah.
remember hearing my parents talking about that.
Yeah, it's funny what sticks around in your mind from when you're young. Yeah, the like seeing the things like on the news or hearing your parents talk about them. But yeah, Waco really was a big kind of name that kicked around in our youth for sure.
Yes, yes. So Ruby Ridge, I say go research it because I don't want to. It was another incident where the individual's innocent and was the government overstepping.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. So
Hmm.
I'll leave it at that. But like we were talking about with the graphics earlier, this is an immersive lo-fi 3D world.
Hmm.
According to the website, Sagebrush features an evocative low poly, low resolution, less is more art style that combines retro aesthetics with modern technology, along with a fully realized soundscape and an original ambient musical score that immerses you in the remote New Mexico desert. And I love the score.
Celeste, we do not totally agree on that. That
Oh,
I
really?
ran real hot and cold on the score in this. I like the cricket, like the kind of ambient noises, but I really wanted this to have some more music or something. Like I wanted there to be just a little bit more. Uh, I can see a scenario. I don't know if you've ever played Into the Breach, but that has one of those kind of like sort of Stranger Things kind of synthy soundtracks, and I feel like there would have been room for kind of like an eerie synthy soundtrack here. You can't ask a game to not be what it set out to be, right? So I wouldn't criticize it for that. But yeah, I wanted just a little bit more. And they had like the record playing at one point, and that
Mhm.
was great. And I wanted a little bit more of that. But you say you really liked it. What did you enjoy about the soundtrack?
So I like that kind of synth, the anticipation. It
Hmm.
kind of builds up like what am I about to get myself into? And I did like that it would go away and then music would pick up after certain moments in the game.
Hmm. It really punctuates the events well. You're right.
Yeah. And I guess because I'm thinking I'm by myself and exploring this compound, not having music made it more realistic to me.
It probably, truth be told, yeah, I think my interest in having a larger amount of audio probably reflects more on me. I think the choice that they made for the game was the artistically correct choice. Like
Well,
it
there's no
contributes to the
wrong
sense of
answer.
right. Yeah, it's art, right? But yeah, I think I actually do agree with what you're saying. I think the sense of isolation is enhanced through the lack of music.
But I do love a good synth, so
Hmm.
maybe if he wants to make like a master deluxe edition of
Yes.
Sagebrush, maybe Nate will listen to this episode and be like, oh, "That Chris guy's onto something.
Yeah,
I'm going to do this just for
Sagebrush
him."
remastered with all HD textures and a constantly blaring, let's say a horn section.
Oh my gosh. And so, like we said, this is a compound. You have a whole compound to explore. It's at Black Sage Ranch. There are trailers, there are halls where they gathered for food and prayer, there are old mines, and there's also a chapel.
Hmm.
So let's, I'm sure most people listening know what a cult is, but I like to define things because you ever do that? Like you think you know a word really well, and then you go look it up in the dictionary, and you're thinking, there's a little bit more to it than I realized.
This just happened to me the other day, and I wish I could remember what word it was, but there was a word that I thought I knew the meaning of that when I looked it up, I actually had it completely wrong. And I say this as an English major, an avid crossword puzzler, but yeah, I found out, yeah, every once in a while you think you know something, and then, it's a good reminder that you don't know as much as you think you do.
And our brains get old.
Oof, yeah, sad but true.
So, a cult is a religion or religious sect generally considered to be extremist or false, with its followers often living in an unconventional manner under the guidance of an authoritarian, charismatic leader.
That's a great definition.
It is. And I think the authoritarian, charismatic leader part is huge. You cannot be a pushover and lead a cult. I'm so sorry if that was your career ambition and we just shattered your dreams. You have to be a special kind of person.
In some ways, the authoritarian, charismatic leader is just, to my mind, the defining feature of what separates a cult from, I don't know, like I'm a practicing Catholic, so I'm not somebody who's like down on religion inherently. But there is like there's such a similarity between like a religion and a cult, right? And so there's always those kinds of discussions about what separates them. And I feel like that authoritarian, charismatic leader is really crucial because religious groups, as a rule, tend to have some kind of institutional background and foundation, even if they're new. Like you look at religious organizations founded just in the last like 150 years, like the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that sort of thing. There are religious groups who often are founded with a charismatic leader, but in some ways the difference between, I think, a cult and a religious group sometimes early on is that the religious group has more broad buy-in and complexity, and the cult is basically focused on that personality. It exists kind of under and in support of a person as opposed to an idea.
That's a great summary and comparison, Christian. Thank you for that, because I've come across these articles online. Well, is a religion a cult, essentially? Right. And the first thing that comes into my mind, and in this game, there's actually a pamphlet of "Are you in a cult?" which is very helpful if you read it and you're like, you start questioning yourself, maybe examine your life a little bit. But
yeah, it's a good pamphlet.
But whenever I think of the comparison, I think a big factor is, can you leave without severe consequences?
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that you can always think of exceptions, right? Mm-hmm. So, like with the authoritarian leader, not authoritarian, but charismatic leader, I immediately thought of like, well, shucks, like, Christianity was founded by a charismatic leader, Jesus. Islam was founded by a charismatic leader, the Prophet Muhammad. Latter-day Saints were founded by a charismatic leader, Joseph Smith, I want to say.
Yes, and then Brigham Young was later on.
Yes, and then Brigham Young, kind of succeeded him. And so, I think of those exceptions. And then I think with like the ease of leaving, I think of, certainly not to get too grim, but, things like honor killings among folks who try to leave like a tight-knit religion, like a more well-founded religious community, or, like the shunning that can happen. For example, if you leave like an Amish community, and like you wouldn't think of the Amish as a cult, but the harm that is done to a person who tries to leave, even on like kind of a psychological, social level, there's less often a direct physical harm, I guess, among leaving a religious group as opposed to a cult.
I think this game just brought up more real life questions.
It does. It's a puzzler. Yeah, it's a puzzler for sure. This is a thorny subject. I think that's part of why the game works so well.
It is. And so I was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
I don't practice anymore, right. But it's so ingrained in my culture where I live that you don't even have to be Catholic, and it affects certain laws, certain, of course, just ways of life. So that's fascinating.
It's an interesting, the line between cult and religion is like, it's inherently a bit blurry, but yeah, I feel like what I like about this definition is that it kind of combines a lot of those things that, like, a lot of religions will have like some kind of exception to this definition, but this definition really kind of captures, if points A, B, C, and D are all true, it's probably a cult.
Oh, we got very deep. But this game, I think, which is the beauty of this game, right? Because exactly. it brings up so many real life talking points, and oh gosh,
makes you think, like all good art.
Yes, exactly. So the gameplay involves a first-person walking simulator. It has elements of mystery. There's slight puzzle solving. There's lots of reading. If you are a reader, you are in for a treat. If you like reading diaries, notes, and I really like that day turns into night. Did you
Yes.
like that?
I loved that. Mechanically, I found it a little bit. My big frustration with this game is how hard it is to navigate. Again, I think that actually contributes to what it has to say. So I think it is probably the right artistic choice. I think it helps support the central thesis. But so I did like that it turned into night. I do wish that I could have seen a little bit easier.
And that's something I was on some Let's Plays I was watching of this where they recommend that you turn up your brightness as much as possible.
I didn't
And
find that it affected it that much. I assumed that it was
really,
something odd with the programming that, at least on the Switch. So I'll bet. I wonder if this, how this plays in HDR, right? Like, I know it's on the Xbox. Xbox has an auto HDR thing, so I wonder if I played this on Xbox, would it be easier to see? But that said, I found that changing the brightness just changed how gray the parts I couldn't see were. Like, it made the parts that I couldn't see just grayer as opposed to pitch black.
that's a good point. Yeah, I struggled. I struggled with the the darkness element a
Yeah,
lot. But you do have a handy dandy flashlight.
thank goodness.
I would not have made it through this game without the flashlight. But any listeners who live in New Mexico, you may be happy to know that this game takes place approximately 250 miles northwest of Albuquerque.
Hmm.
And the Perfect Heaven mass suicide occurred in 1993.
Yep.
I was 4 years old.
Yeah, yeah. Those early '90s were rough for cults. Yeah, this was right in the pocket for cult city there in the U.S.
Are you ready to dive in? You ready to go to the ranch, Chris?
I sure am.
Okay. You open with driving in the desert and you hear a woman's voice and it's the narrator. She says, I met Anne first, waiting for the bus. I asked her what she was selling, and she laughed and said nothing, nothing at all, that what she had to offer was free for anyone who wanted it bad enough. I asked her what had helped her. She just said, James. And then the scene fades, and you are in front of a fence. You're in front of the compound. So you then get to inspect the trunk of your car to get some wire cutters so you can cut the fence because the gate will not open.
No, indeed.
So what did you think about this intro? Did it spook you a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit. It's very evocative. You're instantly alone. I can see a scenario again, like different ways, different little pitfalls that could have happened. Like, what if the opening of this was you on a bus? And I think that would, strangely enough, change the tone of it pretty significantly. So I'm happy that it's the narrator traveling solo in a car to this place. Like, you're isolated from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends up having a lot of resonance later on in the story.
So I'm trying to remember the first time I played this. I was thinking, okay, am I a detective? I was wondering,
Yeah.
am I a detective? Am I going to explore, like, am I going to help people? Am I going to try to bring people out of this cult?
Hmm.
Who did you think you were?
I was really wondering this myself. Yeah, I like you, I assumed that I was some kind of either some manner of law enforcement coming in to investigate what had happened. As it turns out, this is actually, well, I guess we can give spoilers. If somebody's listening to this, they're going to be spoiled on it eventually. But it turns out that it's a bit further in the future than I thought it was from the events that the 1993
Mm-hmm.
suicide. So I thought, yeah, that it was some manner of law enforcement coming to investigate it after it had happened. Like I
Mm-hmm.
assumed that what was going to happen had already happened, but I thought maybe they were investigating it later, or even maybe a historian, visiting to kind of get an understanding of what had happened there.
I love the historian one. That's really good.
I think it's probably just my bias as a historian.
So you take the wire cutters, excuse me, and you cut open the fence. Okay, first of all, that would be very ominous to me that I can't even open the gate, but
Yes.
okay. I'm also not that brave to go explore a compound by myself.
Same.
Okay, but we will understand why this person is alone.
Mhm.
So the first building you enter is the community hall. It's extremely dark inside, so you can inspect pictures after you turn on the generator. You have to find a generator key
Yes.
outside. It hums, it comes to life. You can use light switches. And so then you can start inspecting pictures of Father James. And I think I read somewhere that his likeness, a redheaded man, middle-aged man, is based off the creator's likeness, the creator of
That's
this
very
game.
cute. That
I
is a
think
cute directorial choice.
I could be wrong, but I think so because he
I hope
was
it's true.
limited. He was limited on resources,
Of
right?
course.
So you can also find pictures of Bible verses. And were you a little disturbed by some of the Bible verses in the bathrooms? Did you read those?
Good Lord, yes. Yeah, the one especially I think it's the one in the women's room is and I see, I see you have here in the notes verses from Leviticus. I think it's one of those like real rough like your body is evil, like your body is unclean kind of Old Testament verses, yeah.
Yeah, it was talking about how long in between a woman's menstrual cycle you can
Exactly.
sleep, you can lie with her.
Yeah.
Um, and
Dark stuff.
I'm not going to pretend to be a Bible scholar, but Leviticus it's more of like the rules, right?
Hmm.
It's from the Old
Yeah.
Testament.
Yeah, very Old Testament rules that like it sets up a lot of the dietary restrictions, it sets up a lot of behavioral restrictions, that sort of thing. That like have been modified in interesting ways by different like religious groups over time. To what extent various groups adhere to those Levitical restrictions is an interesting subject. But it looks like the Perfect Heaven cult here was pretty into Leviticus.
Yes, and I noticed Father James cherry picks which Bible verses he wants to follow, but we'll get into that.
Not a coincidence, yeah.
So you can read the bulletin board and learn about members of the flock. They're introducing themselves. I love little touches like that.
Hmm.
Hi, I'm Leonard. Hi, I'm Viola.
This is
And
so sweet and sad. Like this bulletin board really, I think, sets it's another good bit of tone setting as far as kind of getting an idea of who these people are and getting just this little window into what makes them tick.
it reminds me of elementary school. You remember those bulletin
Yeah,
boards in
very
elementary
much.
school?
Yep.
Yes. And so I love this element. You can find a tape deck, okay? And a cult member shares a story. It ends up being the narrator, the same voice we heard at the beginning of the
Hmm.
game. And everything goes black and white, and the light focuses on the tape deck. They're very short, they're about a minute, 2 minutes long of recordings. But in this particular one, the narrator shares times of loneliness after graduating from college.
Hmm.
She was a communications major. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do. I believe she and her boyfriend had broken up.
Right.
And this quote stuck out with me. We were all broken in some way, I think, some more than others. And I believe
Mhm.
she's talking about the members of the cult.
Yeah. It's appropriate that you find this so close to that bulletin board where you're kind of getting introduced to everybody, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
immediately references the us, the collective of the cult.
Great observation, Chris. That's awesome.
Thank you. Oh, I love these tape decks too. I think audio logs are unfairly maligned in games, and I think they can do a lot of good heavy narrative lifting. And I think this game makes the most of them, by just having a single voice, so it's reliably getting access to the same person. Except I want to say in one case we get one from James. I think we get one audio log that's from somebody else, but most of the time they're by this single narrator. Keeps the resources down, keeps you focused on her story. I think these are a really good example of audio logs in the medium.
So now I'm going to get a little philosophical.
Yeah.
Did someone leave these? Are they actually even there? Or is that supposed to represent the narrator pausing and reflecting?
Yeah, I don't think they're there. I hadn't thought about that until you just said it. But now that I think about it, it's everything in this space is set up so deliberately. And the idea of there being all of these tape decks sitting around is absurd and artificial. Which like it would make sense in a game with less kind of like verisimilitude, but in this case, it just wouldn't make any sense for these tape decks to be everywhere. And with what we find out at the end of the game, it makes a lot of sense that the narrator is kind of pausing and reflecting on this. We're just experiencing it through the artificiality of an on-screen tape deck.
Yes, and law enforcement would have scooped these up right
Yes,
away as they
exactly.
came across these tape decks.
If you think about it, the sheer amount of evidence just sitting around this compound that wasn't scooped up really is kind of a scathing indictment of whoever investigated it.
That's a great point. Like maybe you need some training. We're gonna
Yeah.
put you back in investigation 101.
Let's leave the bloody shovel on the ground.
And
Yeah.
oh gosh, I love, love, love the implicit storytelling.
Yep.
If you want to experience just the absolute greatness of this game, you have to read everything. It tells you so much more. So when you go into the kitchen of the community hall, you can read about how a cult member named Leonard takes more than his fair share of food,
Hmm.
and he could face consequences in the cleansing room. Reading that alone was very ominous. I don't think I'd eat ever again.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to see a proper noun cleansing room. You don't want to see that in a note.
No, especially when we get to the cleansing room.
Hmm.
So after you activate the generator for the community hall and you explore, you can then grab the gate key and the farm shed key. So this is really important in the farm shed. You head to the farm shed and you find a jacket and flashlight batteries. You're definitely going to want the flashlight. And so there's also another tape deck. And this one talks about the narrator's experience meeting Father James. James criticizes mainstream religions. And there are multiple notes throughout the compound where he vilifies different denominations of Christianity. He calls
Hmm.
Catholics idol worshipers.
Yep.
I don't remember what he said about maybe like Baptist or
One of them he described as perverts or something. Like I
I
can't
think it was
remember.
Catholics. I think,
It specifically wasn't Catholics because I
okay.
remember that the Catholics were idolaters. Actually, now that you mention it, I think he did say idolaters and perverts. I think you're right. I think that was.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think there were at least four different denominations that he vilified for different reasons.
Maybe Catholic stuck out to me because I was raised Catholic. That's
Same, yeah. I
why.
probably paid a little more attention to that. Yeah.
What's he saying about us?
Yeah.
So then you head to the trailer park, and this is where all the cult members lived. So you can easily miss this item, Chris.
And I didn't. I actually found this. But yeah,
Do you
yeah. Go on, go on.
you want to tell us what it is?
Yes, it is a pregnancy test found in an outhouse, a positive pregnancy test.
The positive's a big deal.
Yes, it is.
So, oh, we're going to get more into that pregnancy test. And you get an
Mhm.
achievement if you find it.
Oh, cool.
Yes, yes. So what's interesting about the trailer park is some trailers cannot be opened because the doors are rusted shut. And that irritated me because I'm nosy. I want to peek around
Hmm.
everybody's living quarters. I want to learn more about them.
Yeah.
So then you can go to Andrew's trailer. Just keep poking around. You'll eventually be able to open someone's trailer. You can open Andrew's trailer and you see Viola's note and you learn about her interest in Andrew. And I was like, ooh, things are about to get spicy soap opera right here. And we also learn that she has two children, Lucas and Juliet. Okay, this is something I have a big issue with. I
Hmm.
don't care what consenting adults choose to do, but I hate that children were dragged into this.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and do we know whether Lucas and Juliet were on site here at the compound or if they were her children who she left when she came here?
They are on the compound.
Okay, I didn't catch that.
When you go to Viola's trailer, it'll actually say Sister Viola with Lucas and Juliet or
You're
something.
right. I remember that sign. I didn't make the I
Yeah,
I didn't make the connection there. Yep, I remember that sign now. Oh,
there's a
that
lot.
that's doubly sad.
It's a lot to take in, and
Yeah.
you learn reading notes later on that Viola is recently divorced. She's in her mid 30s. I think
Hmm.
Lucas is 9, Juliet's 11. They're young kids.
Yeah, when I found out that she was divorced and she had the kids, I automatically jumped to the kids are with her ex-husband. But that
I
turned out to be untrue.
I
I wish
wish
they
they had
were.
been with her
Yeah.
ex-husband. Yes. So then you go to explore Andrew's trailer a little bit more, and there's another tape deck. And you learn about the routine of the cult and how everyone's roles worked. People cook, people clean, people build things. They're a big community. And this narrator's quote stuck out to me. I would have done anything for Father, as in reference to Father James. He saved me.
Hmm.
Whew. Okay. So then we go to Viola's trailer, and you can read about her message to Lillian. Lillian is beginning to show doubts in the flock. And we can also listen to a tape that further explains the narrator's happiness with being Father James, quote unquote, chosen.
Yeah.
So Viola, I realized I put she, but we wanted to make this clear with Lillian or Viola. Viola believes she is pregnant, but she is unsure who the father is.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting detail. I assumed that the father was Father James for reasons that we find out later. But yeah, that's interesting. I guess there was more romance going on at this compound.
Well, reading Viola's note to Andrew about, hey, after my kids are done eating or they're in their trailer, we should meet.
Yes.
Wherever else. So I was wondering, okay, is it Andrew's? Is it Father James?
Right.
I don't know. Is it Leonard's? Whatever
Yeah.
guy. So the next up is the school. So you can imagine that the teachings are not focused so much on geometry and literature as they are on the Bible, but specifically Father James' twisted views of the Bible.
The Book of Sariel, I think, is his own like contribution to the Bible, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think in the book of Revelation it says, do not add to the Bible or something, do not take away from the Bible. Did you read the different children's notes and homework assignments?
Yeah, I loved these. Like I think we get 3 or 4 of them. 75% of them are, all except for one, are pretty talking about the various things that the kids like about Father James. They talk about like him making jokes, and that makes them like him. And Juliet, one of the children, talks about how she admires Jesus, and she has a little note from the teacher on her assignment that says like, we need to talk about this, which again I think is kind of a grim vision of things to come, and another sad indictment of what is rotten at the core of this cult.
Yes. Wouldn't the whole point of this religious cult, a Christian-based religious cult, be to admire Jesus? So that just lets you know about the narcissist in charge over here.
Yeah, it's not really about the faith or the ideas. It's about propping up this very sad, desperate man.
Yes. And so there's another tape deck and another generator. You can activate the generator, which you will want to do if you want to see. And the narrator talks about helping Viola in the schoolhouse. And she brings up the woman we heard about at the beginning, Anne. Anne's kind of like the mother of the flock, but Viola was the most devoted member. I would say this is not a quote from the game, but it came to my mind, fire and brimstone type teachings.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff here.
Yeah, no turn the other cheek kind of teachings.
No. Which I think is kind of interesting. Like that, the interplay between those tends to be important for like the appeal of broadly speaking a religious group, but specifically Christianity. You know, the interplay of those is important in that, like the divine mercy and so forth is a key part, I think, of what draws people to it from outside. And if there's a minor flaw in the writing here, I think it's that we don't spend enough time seeing that side of Father James or the cult. Like we kind of hear about it in the narration that people were attracted to this place and it filled a hole for them, but we never hear much about the specifics of what was taught that made it appealing to them. Like we just hear the fire and brimstone part, which doesn't seem like it would attract people.
That's a great point. We see a little bit of Father James' views later on, but there's nothing warm and cuddly, which makes me think.
No.
So what was he running on then? Just
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I know there are some folks who just kind of crave order. And so there is kind of a sense of order to it. Although even that we don't really see a lot of, in that Father James is a little wishy-washy. He kind of flies by the seat of his pants as far as what we see the cult transform through these notes in the time that, in such a short period of time, that you can't even really see it that the order appealed to them, like the
Hmm.
structure and everything. We do see a little bit of the structure insofar as there was like, these are your roles, which of course is appealing to folks who are searching for meaning. But yeah, I think it is a minor flaw of the writing that we don't get a little bit more of what's appealing about it. Like we hear Father James made jokes kind of from the kids, like that's not something that would attract somebody to a cult. Like the things that we find out about him that are positive traits are not positive enough to make people join a death cult.
That's a great point. I don't. There are some trailers again that you can't access, and you don't
Yeah.
really learn about all the characters. Uh, I think there were some married couples, but the people we learned the most about seemed like they were single.
Yep.
So, like you were saying, the draw of order, I'm wondering if it's like, I just want to escape. I just need an escape
Hmm.
and some stability. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for me to criticize this too much because I don't really want the game to be any longer, and I think what's there is so substantial. But it is interesting that the writing gets much more into the psychology of the characters and
Hmm.
their flaws, and why they needed something to fill the hole, without really getting into what the specific appeal of Perfect Heaven was, beyond
I
just
get,
kind of the personal charisma of Father James.
well, I guess our homework assignment is let's join a cult and find out.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find out. Let's see what makes this tick and hope we get out the other side.
So you need to read the calendar and you're going to learn the code needed to open the gate to the rectory. So that is something about this game with reading I do want to point out. In addition to learning a lot of interesting facts and getting a lot of substance about the game, you do need codes to open some sections, and you have to pay attention to what some notes say because the code you need on the calendar, I think it's the day that Father James had his revelation or something.
Exactly. Yeah, June 3rd, I want to say. Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so you need that to open the gate to the rectory. And this is a rectory was another word where I'm like, okay, I've heard that my whole
Right,
life.
exactly. We have
But I
rectories.
looked,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's the place where the religious clergy live,
Hmm.
correct? Okay.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
this was very odd that this was here. Like, I really specifically think of rectories as uh Catholic and like Anglican,
Hmm.
Episcopal, I guess you'd say in the US. Like it tends to be for certain religious groups. It doesn't. I Correct me if I'm wrong if you know this. I don't tend to think of too many Protestant groups having rectories because the
Hmm.
clergy tends to be just drawn from the community, as
Hmm.
opposed to being kind of like set aside as they are, in Catholicism. And I thought that it was kind of funny that we had a rectory here. I just don't tend to think of cults
Hmm.
having rectories.
I know that's a good point. So my hometown's church, there was a church and there was this hall next to it where
Hmm.
you could have Sunday school and you could
Yep.
actually book it to have events. And then next to the church was the house, what we called the priest house.
Yeah.
I don't remember we called it the rectory.
That would be a rectory though. Maybe it was just like a nomenclature kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
that traditionally would be referred to as a rectory.
I'm thinking too much into this, but that's a good point. But okay, now that you're making me think again, Chris, have
Mm.
we noticed all the poor flock members live in these teeny tiny trailers? And do we see what James lives in? A nice two-story house.
Yeah, yeah. This is kind of an interesting reversal as well from other more institutional religious communities where broadly speaking the clergy, I mean, outside of situations where things have gone wrong and clergy have amassed fortunes they shouldn't have, which of course does happen. But like the traditional thing is supposed to be that clergy, broadly speaking, in a host of religious traditions, don't live in much fancier digs than the people. And generally, even where they do live in fancier digs than the average person, it's a communal living space.
Hmm.
So, it's a group of people sharing one slightly fancier place. Whereas that dynamic is reversed. As you said, the flock get these kind of dumpy, extremely tiny trailers. Like, can you imagine Viola and her two children in that tiny trailer? It's just so small. And then, yeah, Father James has, multi-story house all to himself.
And they have to walk to the outhouse to use the bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't get a lot of 1990s outhouses. It's rough.
If they're they're roughing it. That's
While we're here, I did just briefly want to draw attention to this little puzzle with getting the code. I really like this. This was one of my favorite little moments in the game because I love like classic 90s survival horror. And this is straight out of a 1990s survival horror, like needing to examine documents to get a code, then to fill it in somewhere in the environment to progress, is just like classic Silent Hill, Resident Evil, that sort of thing.
Oh, yes. I think if you're a fan of those games, you'll probably enjoy this.
Exactly. There's a surprising amount of connective tissue here. And like a lot of the time, walking simulators don't quite strike my fancy because they aren't as mechanics forward. And I tend to be kind of a mechanics over story guy. But this had such a nice balance of the two due to those little puzzles.
I'm glad it wasn't too bad of an experience for you. I didn't know you didn't like walking simulators.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that I don't like them. They're not my preferred genre. But in much the same way that like 3D action isn't my preferred genre, but I still play it sometimes. You gotta have a diet. Diet of all different genres.
I like that, a balanced diet.
Yes.
So then when you go to the rectory, you do find a VHS tape, which if you're not familiar with those, that's what we had before DVDs and streaming.
It was a dark age. You had to rewind them.
Yes, and if they could get messed up in your VCR, which was the machine that played them. I messed up some VHS tapes.
We've all had a VCR that ate a tape,
God. So then
Terrible
you also
medium.
it was. Then you find a note from Father James about how he is a prophet whose quote unquote teachings are directly from the Messiah. Okay. Very inflated sense of self.
Yeah.
You also find a diary, I believe I don't know if it's Viola or Anne, about how James seems to be entertaining people of the flock. And by that, I mean he is having sex with members of the flock.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the turn. It's the turn that virtually every cult leader makes at some point.
Yes. And the room where you find a lot of these things, it's, it's not something you'd think a religious person would have.
No, this is so like creepy and sad. It's just, this very kind of, he's got like a camcorder set up next to his bed. It's very gross.
There are red lights on.
Yes, exactly.
And I don't know if he was filming the acts with a red light or if it's just supposed to symbolize red alert, red alert.
That's a good question. Yeah, I assume that it was the lighting of the room, just because I think it contributes to that kind of like debaucherous tone. And it occurs to me to walk back for just a moment, lest I be kind of kink shaming here on a podcast or anything. Like, if people want to videotape what they're doing, like by all means, But it's the coercive nature of this. There's
a power dynamic.
It's the power dynamic that makes this so unpleasant. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. It's again, I don't like Chris said, you do whatever you like as a consenting adult, but he's manipulating these people, and especially as you read these notes, and he's saying he's the prophet. So of course that's going to make people feel special. Oh, I'm his chosen.
Exactly.
Like Viola said, I'm his chosen, or Lillian said. There's another tape in the bedroom, and we hear Father James. He's giving a sermon on people's roles and justifying his sleeping with the women of the flock, even the married ones. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, there's another note I think about this, about how like it's normally any other time the marriage bond would be more important, but because he's so important, it's even more valuable than the marriage bond. Just very, very coercive, creepy stuff.
Yeah, I think he says how women are supposed to provide relief, or I don't know. You kind of want to throw up a little bit while you're listening to this.
I sure do. Yeah.
So that's very much a reflection, an inspiration from Jim Jones, because when I was watching that documentary about Jonestown, he would say things like that. And I think he even slept with men.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering if Father James slept with men as well.
Yeah, we don't really get an inkling of that. We do see we do see a very unpleasant bit right towards the end where he's speculating about like the appropriate age that he can start sleeping with people. And you can see him starting to modify his thinking on that and speculating about whether he can go younger than he had been, which is
Oh,
a dark little moment. So yeah, there's definitely some flexibility in who Father James is targeting with his affections.
and I was
Whether
about to,
that extends like gender wise or just age wise, it's hard to say.
and I was about to say, I guess the silver lining to this is that he's not going after the children, but I forgot about that part.
Yeah, well, there's no sign that that happened before the mass suicide event. So, it's just maybe that would have been the direction that it was headed in.
Again, it's killing me that the detectives do not pick up these VHS tapes and these notes, but I digress. There's so much information.
Yeah.
So you can also read a diary with a note to Viola about there's a deceiver in the group.
Hmm.
And Father James is beseeching her to seduce the men, namely Andrew, Leonard, and Peyton, to find out who is a traitor.
My money's on
So
Leonard, that food stealing jerk. No, I jest.
I like that. I like that. If he can steal food, he's gonna steal the flock away from
Yeah.
Father James. So I believe that's why earlier we found that note with Viola kind of talking to Andrew that way.
Hmm.
Hey, my kids are going to be in bed or doing whatever if you want to
Right.
come hang out.
Oh yeah, I thought that was sincere, but now that you mention it, when you piece together the details, that's probably part of this plot. You're right.
Sneaky, sneaky. So now we head back to the trailer park and we enter Leonard's trailer. Navigating this in the dark with a flashlight is a little trying. The trailer park it can be a little annoying, it can be a little time consuming.
Hmm.
Then you find some bolt cutters and use them to enter Peyton's trailer. And you find what Chris mentioned earlier, a bloody shovel. Why is this still here? I don't know.
Yeah.
Leonard's trailer has a tape deck with a message about erratic behavior and messages from Father James, which we alluded to. He seems to keep changing the
Hmm.
goalpost
Yeah.
with what he expects from his followers. There are changed rules and views. Innocent things are now mortal sins. And he seems to be afraid. And the note talks about who the possible traitor is. I don't think they explicitly say it. I think he's just talking to Andrew about let's meet. I know it's him. Let's meet at his
Yeah.
trailer.
Yeah, he's definitely growing more paranoid as he becomes more selfish and power hungry.
Yeah, I think he's like, oh, they're on to me.
Right.
So then we head off to Peyton's trailer and we find extensive notes on all the members. So this kind of gives it away. The notes in Peyton's trailer that you can tell Peyton's head is screwed on a little bit tighter than the other folks. I'm trying to remember who is what. There's someone in the group who's a former police officer, I believe, or military member.
Yeah, I don't think that's Peyton.
I think it's Henry. But
Yeah.
there's a guy
It was
named
one of the ones who I don't think had too big of a role in the story. I do
yeah.
remember catching that. Yeah, he was like a former Marine or something like that.
Yeah, and someone I might be Leonard is a former drug addict.
Yep. Yeah,
And
there's too many. There's kind of too many names in this. I feel like to keep really close track of. Like I kind of honed in on maybe two or three of the like Lillian, James, and Peyton were kind of the people who I remembered best.
yeah, and since you can explore only a few trailers, those are the people you tend to focus on.
Right.
So then you have to head to the Big Tree Fire Pit because we learn that there's a key for Lillian's trailer buried there. And this is another little fun achievement. Did you do this one?
No, so funny enough, anything with achievements doesn't work on Switch. Like the Switch doesn't have an achievement system.
Okay.
So I mean, individual games sometimes have internal achievements, so maybe this does have that. I couldn't say, but no, I did not get the achievement here. But what is that achievement, Celeste?
It's actually it's cute considering the tone of the game. There are some baseball diamonds, and if you run the bases, you get an achievement.
Adorable. Isn't that fun?
Well, I guess
No story is too dark for a little baseball gag, you know?
It's America's pastime.
Yeah.
So the key for Lillian's trailer is buried under a rock dirt pile at the base of the big tree. And you have to use the bloody shovel to unearth it, which felt a
Mm-hmm.
little morbid to me, but
Yeah.
okay. And we're going back to the trailer park. I feel like that's a theme.
I kind of like that you have to use the shovel with the blood on it. I think it dovetails really nicely with Lillian's sense of guilt about this. That the tool
Oh,
that she uses to learn more about this has the blood of a person who she feels responsible for the death of on it.
Chris, that's genius.
This game is so tightly plotted.
That is so
It's
cool.
yeah, I was really impressed with this.
Oh, I love that. And so speaking of Lillian, now that we have the key, we can
Hmm.
go into her trailer. So there's another tape deck and there's a key to the cleansing room, which we mentioned
Hmm.
earlier. There's also a diary about how Father James' teachings change. She's noticing it as well. So apparently they change based on what is convenient for him.
Yeah.
And the tape is about Peyton's role in investigating Father James. So I believe he's with the FBI.
That's how I recall this, yeah, and this again made me think of like the Waco incident. Like he's corresponding with the FBI on this,
Hmm.
so you're a little bit afraid that maybe there's going to be some kind of unfortunate confrontation.
Yes. So Peyton wants to help the narrator leave the cult, and that's where you find this pamphlet about how to tell you from a cult. And it's extremely detailed. It's about
Hmm.
3, 4 pages long.
I want to know if Nathan so and so, I can't remember his last name, the creator of this. I want to know if he pulled this from a real world pamphlet. This is just so well written in that informative style.
That's a good question.
Yeah, maybe just inspired by, but I thought this was another tight bit of writing. Very
It's very,
different than the diary entries, but also very well written.
yes. Then you'll also find a note from Father James warning Lillian not to read secular books that could lead her astray. And he kind of hints that there could be severe consequences if she continues doing that.
Classic cult stuff. Yeah, only listen to me, don't listen to what anybody else has to say.
So this makes me wonder some things about the next part regarding Lillian.
Hmm.
So then you head to the cleansing area. And by the way, sometimes the stretches can be a little long, especially the darker it gets, because you might get lost. So you're
I
not
did
just
often. Yeah.
you're not just transported to the next building. You have to walk there.
It's an interesting choice that your character doesn't appear on the mini map. You can pull up a map to see the compound, but you don't have a little icon on the map to show where you are.
Oh yeah, and you also have a note about the in-game map right here.
Yeah, this threw me off. We'll get around to that in just a moment. And yeah, I'll address that then because this is the one part that I needed to use a guide for.
That is a good point. And we also never see what the narrator looks like, by the way.
No, that's
No,
true.
no mirrors, and it's not like the What Remains of Edith Finch, where you can actually look down and see Edith's feet and arms.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that always an interest? I don't want to take us off on a tangent. This is, but I always think it's interesting the choice that a developer makes between having in a first person game your character avatar have arms and legs versus not. And then that varies pretty radically from one game to the next. I think the first time I encountered that was Halo. I think Halo was the first person game that I played where you could look down and see your character's legs. But not every game has
Oh,
that. It varies quite a bit. I don't know
I'm
which way I prefer.
I'm wondering if that was a decision by Nate due to the fact that he was a one-man show for this, and it would have
Yeah,
been.
it was a smart call not to have it because it doesn't end up affecting anything. And I'm
Mm-mm.
sure if you could cut some corners doing this one person, you would.
Absolutely. So the cleansing room is very gruesome from the get-go. You walk up to it, it kind of looks like a giant red barn,
Hmm.
and you hear and see some little flies, gnats buzzing around, and there's blood spilling from the front of the door. So, excuse my language, but this is when I thought shit's about to get real.
Yeah, I thought we were going to find a bunch of bodies in here. I thought this is where the suicide took place.
Yes, yes. So you walk in, and that's when music kicks. It's been silent.
Hmm.
Music starts again. It's very dark, synthy music. And you walk in, and there's an axe on the floor in front of an altar. Okay, so this part, if you are if you've been listening this far, I'm assuming you played the game because we've just spoiled a heck of a lot for you. But this is definitely the most disturbing and most uncomfortable I mean, James' little sex room was very uncomfortable, but this one is disgusting. Absolutely
Yeah,
disgusting.
this is very dark. Like, I mean, this is obviously a place where a lot of harm has occurred.
Yes. So when you heard the term cleansing room, what did you think?
I assumed it was just again, the kind of history background, but I tend to think of like self-flagellation and so forth from the Middle Ages, like that,
Hmm.
expiating expiating moral sins through harming the body. Um, and so I assumed it was some. I guess in the end, funny enough, I guess I assumed it was what it turned out to be. That it was a place for people to be kind of voluntarily tortured for the purpose of cleansing their soul, so to speak.
Yes. I guess if you want to look at it more optimistically, you could think, oh, is it a place where they baptize people as well?
Yeah, if I hadn't already found the blood outside the door and seen on the map that this is one of the perils of getting lost, is I had already been to the outside of the cleansing room by the time that I read about it.
Hmm.
And so yeah, you're right. That colored my impression of it. If I had just read about the cleansing room first, maybe I would have thought, oh, this could be a positive, like yeah, like a baptismal space.
Yes, and because of that note that you see so early on about Leonard stealing food and he might have to go to the cleansing room to face consequences, oh, it's ominous all
Yeah.
around.
Yep.
And so there is a very disturbing note where you can read about the punishments for certain sins. Like, for example, if you steal, I think they cut off your finger.
Yeah. Yeah.
If this one's really gruesome, but they say there are certain, I don't know if it's murder, rape, and something else, they will cut off the offending appendage,
Right.
which, maybe in some cases I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh.
Hopefully it didn't come up here. I guess except for obviously all of the coercive stuff that Father James is doing, but clearly he is not subject to these same rules.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems very rooted in the Old Testament laws, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. The old ways. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, what I found absolutely disturbing is you find another tape deck about the cleansing room where I think it was weekly, they'd have to declare their sins to the flock, like a public sacrament of reconciliation. That's what came to my mind because when I would go to confession, it was just a priest. It wasn't the whole congregation, right?
This is actually how reconciliation was originally done in the Catholic tradition.
Really?
In the early centuries, actually, as late as when Christianity reached Ireland, because if memory serves, it was still being done there into like I want to say maybe shucks, I don't remember when Christianity reached Ireland, but it must have been sometime in like the late Roman era, I want to say. So even as late as maybe let's say like the 500s AD, this
Hmm.
is how confession was done in the Catholic tradition, was that there would be a period. Actually, funny enough, I think we still have that portion of Mass, but it's now like a communal. It's gosh, for any Catholic listeners, it's the portion of Mass where it's like the Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
That don't quote me on this, read about it, of course. I'm no scholar, but I believe that was originally the period where members of the congregation would confess in public to the sins that they had committed. And then at some point it became like a communal asking for forgiveness. But yeah, this tradition that they have here at Perfect Heaven is actually straight from early Catholicism.
Wow. So it makes me wonder, how honest are people?
Oh, probably not very honest. I think that's probably why they changed it, right? That's probably why it became a private practice. I'm not sure when that changed, but I think there was a sense that people were maybe not that honest when they were talking in front of all of their family and friends.
I'm just picturing that you can make that an interesting comedy sketch where maybe one guy's having an affair with another woman and he's standing
Hmm.
right next to his wife and he's not going to say anything in front of the whole congregation.
Yeah, it's ripe for comedy. I wish we had sitcoms from the 500s AD. We probably could have gotten to see this.
Maybe like the Canterbury Tales, right?
Yes, there's probably something in there for sure.
So the tape deck, we hear the narrator talk about these public confessions, and she describes it as terrifying and wonderful to see. People would confess and then they'd willingly accept their punishments.
Yeah, I think terrifying and wonderful is kind of a good way to put this. Like it's both scary that people would have given themselves over so strongly to something, but it's also there is something wonderful about the idea of somebody understanding that what they did was wrong and accepting the consequences for it. Like that, broadly speaking, isn't always how people behave, and usually it's not so heightened and horrifying as this. But generally the idea that somebody would say, this is my fault, I accept the consequences for it, is a wonderful thing in most contexts.
Yeah, most people aren't so contrite.
No.
Gosh.
Yeah, so terrifying and wonderful is a nice succinct way to put that, I think.
I'm thinking back to confession days when I'd have to think of all the bad things I did, and like, did you I was reading it and I was trying to think, would I fall under any of these punishments?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm a bad Catholic. I don't go to confession as much as I should. I suspect I'm in line with most Catholics in that way, but that's my editorializing. But yeah, I did think this was an interesting little bit here. A little bit of self-reflection, right?
It is. So, okay. Then we go to the mines. Yes, there are mines here. Are there mines in New Mexico?
Oh, probably. There's mines all over the Southwest, if memory serves. I don't know what they would have been mining for, but I mean, I guess it's kind of regionally. I'm based in the East Coast, so I tend to think of like West Virginia and the Appalachians for mines.
Like coal?
Exactly, yeah, coal mining. I'm not sure what they would have been mining for in New Mexico, but I know there's a whole like project to try to close those mines because they're like a danger to the people nearby.
Okay.
Big federal project, if memory serves.
I know that turquoise is a very valuable gemstone. Do they mine for that?
I have no idea. I've never thought of where turquoise came from. I just assumed it came from stores.
I only know this because I follow some people on Instagram who they buy jewelry from a lot of Native American tribes, and there tends to be a lot of turquoise included in this jewelry. So again, I don't know if there are any listeners who would like to help us. I don't care if it's 5 years from now that you're listening to this and you want to let us know, please. I need to know what people are mining for in New Mexico.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing that too. Yeah.
So then there's a blockade, you break it with the axe and you go through different obstacles. You eventually find a body. It is indeed Peyton's body. And there's a note next to it. Then did you notice all the weapons?
Yeah, this is, again, it starts getting more and more Jonestown, starts getting more Waco, this sense that that overlap with militia groups. You have a lot of very heavy weaponry here, like machine guns in boxes. I thought it was very cute that they're just a flat pixel, like they're a flat image. Which I liked. Like it took me back. I played a lot of games in the 90s, so this is kind of what we got in 3D games of that era. And so I did think that it was kind of charming that the visual design of them is just a flat image of weapons in a chest.
Yes. Well, okay, maybe they weren't actually mining. Maybe that was a front. Maybe that was strictly so they could use the weapons and have target practice, because you do see some of the sheets for target practice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you see a little shooting range down there. Yep.
Which I guess would have muffled the sound of guns going off for anybody on the outside listening. If they would hear guns, they'd be like, "Whoa, what's going on?"
It's a terrible place. Having done some shooting in the past and everything, like it's not a good idea to do that down there due to the you want dirt backstops and stuff. Like if it's a mine with like rocks, it's a good way to accidentally have some ricochets happening. But I guess, yeah, this is not a safety first compound. So it is a good question about whether Perfect Heaven mined this or they just moved their stuff into a pre-existing mine space. And I don't think that's clear. I don't think it's clear if it was a disused mine that they stored their stuff in, or if they mined it out.
I start thinking of these things as we talk. Like I didn't even think of some of these topics while I was writing these notes. See,
isn't that the fun? Yeah, that's the fun of it.
Well, okay, so someone who's better with physics than I am. I hope that's you, Chris.
Uh-oh.
If, in addition to the ricochet, could you also cause a collapse,
Oh,
like an
probably not.
avalanche?
Maybe I wouldn't think so. Just because uh like the nature of ballistics, I think you would need to have kind of like that's why TNT kind of is what it is. Like it's hard to collapse a space unless it's like already given to collapse. And if it was already given to collapse, all of your digging it out is probably going to be what causes the cave in. I don't think broadly speaking like a bullet could cause a cave in.
I guess I was wondering about because they have these semi-automatic rifles. They have some
Exactly.
very powerful weapons, and I don't remember if we found out. Oh, I think it's Henry, right? Because he was in the military. Is that how they
Somebody's getting them. Yeah, somebody, I can't remember how they were getting them, but one of their members did have like a connection. It was probably Henry. I think you're right about that.
I can't help but wonder what his connection was thinking. Why does Henry need all of these semi-automatic rifles?
Yeah. Yeah, what's Henry up to? I don't know. Some really
Uh,
unscrupulous friends.
and then, okay, I'm also wondering about, okay, how good are these people? I mean, they talk about how they're going to have trainings, mandatory trainings. Father
Hmm.
James is all about training everyone, including the children, which I don't want to picture a 9-year-old with a semi-automatic rifle.
Right, exactly.
I have just so many questions of, and not everybody who's part of the cult's going to be comfortable holding a gun. I mean, you just don't give this kind of weapon to just any. Oh God, I have
It's
so
not a
many,
good setup. It's not a good setup they have going on down there. There
so
is
many,
no positive outcome.
so many things could have gone wrong. I mean,
Yes.
I remember like 10 or more years ago, I was like, oh, I want to try shooting something, and
Right.
it was like a small pistol. It might have even been a Magnum. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
I I was so nervous and I was trying to shoot a target and the recoil enough made me never want to touch it again.
Yeah, they're not easy. No, they're not easy. Yeah, it's not, training is an important thing I think for these folks, but it's very hard to imagine any of this going well. It I guess the outcome that we get has a lower mortality than might otherwise have happened with them stockpiling all of these weapons.
I'm sorry to go off on that tangent. I just have so many questions about.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of logistical questions that this game poses that it does not answer.
That's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. What is it? Suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, willing suspension of disbelief. Yeah, pretty important for anything, but especially for this.
So Father James claims that he's protecting the flock from the enemy, and he's
Mm,
probably in trouble with the law. Peyton's probably been communicating with the FBI, with the United States government about what's going on.
exactly.
And so, like you alluded to with the bloody shovel and guilt, we hear another tape deck about it's by the body, Peyton's body, and it's about the narrator's guilt in Peyton's death. She wasn't involved in killing him, but she's worried because she talked with him that they became suspicious, the other members of the flock,
Hmm.
and they found out what he was doing. So the flock just covered it up and said, "Oh, he left,"
Yeah.
and nobody thought anything else of it.
This is some very well observed survivor's guilt. Like I like that it indicates that the narrator is aware that she didn't take an active role in his death, but she has this sense of guilt for basically not having stopped it, for not having done more, or perhaps for having some kind of contributory role, as you said, to people being suspicious. And like from the outside looking in, it's very easy to say, like, good heavens, like you can't blame yourself for the actions of this murderous cult. But also it's very well observed. Like that is what people feel.
Yeah, it's very realistic.
Yeah.
So this part, the next part is very challenging without a guide, for me at least. Would you
Yep.
like to elaborate on this, Chris?
Yeah, this is what I needed a guide to figure out. You find a note that indicates that there is a key in the southwest of the cornfields here at the compound. The cornfields are kind of broken up into 4 quadrants: northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast. And so I thought that it was going to be hard to find because you're searching. At this point, it's pretty much completely dark. And so you're searching through these rows of corn with a thin flashlight beam anyway. I will say just a minor technical quirk on the Switch version, probably on the other console versions, is that aiming to interact with items can be a little finicky, a little precise. So it's probably easier with a mouse and keyboard. But the point is that I was already aware that it was going to be hard to find whatever tiny patch of dirt existed in the middle of a cornfield to find this key buried underneath it. However, I went up and down and up and down and up and down the southwest quadrant, and finally I couldn't find anything, so I consulted a guide, and it made me aware of the fact that the map in this game is not oriented how we traditionally orient maps in fiction, which is that north is up. We're kind of trained from the start that north is up. If you look at the map, north is left. So I was looking around. Well, I don't have great spatial reasoning. One of the quadrants that was not northwest, or whatever it is, southwest, I guess, is the one that you're looking for. So I had to reorient myself. And then as soon as I realized which portion of the cornfield it actually was in, I did locate it. It actually was pretty clearly visually flagged once you're in the right quadrant.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think about the orientation aspect.
I felt so silly. I'd been looking at that map the whole game, looking at that little arrow pointing north and not internalizing it.
No, don't feel bad. I was just blown away by the darkness. So that was my problem.
It's so hard to see. Yeah.
It's basically like this little pile, again, like where you find Lillian's key. It's a little dirt pile, but in the cornfield this time. But that is my biggest frustration. That was probably my biggest frustration playing.
Yeah, if I want to be a little nitpicky, it's probably not an ideal. It's not a puzzle, right? Like it's just a search and find for which patch of dirt contains this, because you already have the note telling you like the approximate location of it. It's a little busy work to try to look around for this in the dark. I don't think it especially helps out the narrative or the gameplay or anything. So again, a minor critique, were I to have one.
Yes, mine too.
Yeah.
So this key leads you to the top floor of the rectory, which I don't believe we said, but the first time you visit the rectory, if you go upstairs, you cannot access the room. So this is the key that leads to that. You can finally watch the VHS tape in there. It is James' room, his bedroom. And when you watch the VHS tape, it's James rehearsing a speech. And you have to listen pretty carefully. And the other cult member, she's not on the camera. I guess she's in the background. She's his helper. And she helps remind him of what the code is. And you need that code to open up the safe next to his bedroom. Next to his bed, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Did you notice the illicit materials that Father James had?
Yeah, this was a bummer. This is this is a really weird callback for me, but it reminded me of bear with me on this, but obviously that this was not a religious leader, but a religiously inclined leader, but of all people in American history, Osama bin Laden. Obviously, mastermind of the Al-Qaeda September 11th attacks, and this kind of religious zealot. When his home was finally raided and he was killed by the U.S. military, a huge amount of pornography was found on his hard drives and so forth. And that's kind of what this cast me back to. Just this idea of this sense of religious zealotry and purity for everybody else, but it's almost a sense of projection by a person who can't fulfill their own ideology.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that. I didn't realize they found that on his hard drive.
Yeah, I don't remember why that detail stuck with me. It was a reminder that like, oh, here's some person who, casts this image of like religious purity, and oh, nope, they're just like everybody else.
Was he married?
Yeah, he was married to a few people.
Okay. I wonder if they were Western films. You know what I'm saying?
I couldn't say. I couldn't say what the particulars were of the cache that was found, but it just did remind me of that it was just kind of a kind of a grim moral indictment of a person who wants to project a holier image than they can live up to.
That's a great point. because Father James, I don't know if obviously he said like it's good for me to sleep with whoever I want because I'm the prophet and don't you want the
Right.
prophet to be pleased or whatever.
Hmm.
Did he deter? No, well, he wanted Viola to try to seduce some of the men.
Yeah, like was he trying to kind of keep everybody to himself, or was he encouraging relationships among his flock? I don't think that's in the text. I don't think it's clear. Like the only bit that we get is him trying to have Viola seduce people.
Hmm.
So you could draw an inference from that that romantic relationships were an assumed reality of the cult, because if they weren't, then that would have drawn attention to itself.
Yeah, I don't remember reading in the different notes. I mean, of course, his beliefs changed; they would
Right.
fluctuate depending on what he wanted, whatever benefited him. But I don't remember reading anything that explicitly said you couldn't date or married
No.
couples had to abstain. I don't even know if they pointed out what they were required to wear.
No, I don't think it's ever stipulated. Not in the text.
I have so many questions. I guess because I'm thinking with the materials you find that he has, I would assume the women in the cult could not dress that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like that, I guess that varies from kind of cult to cult, because I'm thinking of what's that one where they all had to wear the tracksuits, like that's
Oh,
one where
Heaven's Gate.
yeah, Heaven's Gate, that had kind of a uniform component. And then but then like there are other cult groups where it seems like they don't particularly care what people dress like. Like that's often a matter of power dynamics and coercion, is
Hmm.
enforcing dress codes,
Hmm.
be it in cults or elsewhere. And yeah,
Yes.
that we don't really see that here.
So I've read The Handmaid's Tale. Again, that's I know it's not a cult necessarily, and I watched the show. It was actually one of
Yeah.
those that I had to stop watching because it made me mad. Like I'd be filled with
Yes.
rage every
I know.
time.
Yeah, I had to skip it. I figured I'd be too bummed out. Yeah.
It's it's good. It's very
Exactly.
good. But I'm thinking of how the wives wear green, the handmaids wear red.
Hmm.
I think the husbands, the whatever they're called. I mean, it also depends on your status. I think they wore suits. So I was just thinking of that. Did they make them wear different clothing to represent different levels in the hierarchy? Is there
Hmm.
a hierarchy? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
hard
thinking
to say. Yeah. That's for Sagebrush too.
Sagebrush too. I would play it. I would play it. So you can read Father James' diary, and you definitely get the impression that he's very self-important. He probably
Hmm.
suffers from illusions of grandeur. And I can't help but wonder if he also has some kind of, or had some kind of mental health issue, perhaps.
Yeah, it's hard to say. He's got that classic kind of insecurity as well. It's very he's very blustery, but also you get the impression that he wouldn't have so many fears if he didn't have some kind of insecurity. I can't tell if he buys into his own hype. I guess the fact that there's a mass suicide at the end suggests that he did buy into his own hype. But it's a little hard to tell whether he believed it or not, isn't it?
It is. Right. So next you grab the golden seal in the safe and you head to the chapel.
Hmm.
And the note talks about a bunker of sorts that's within the chapel where there's
Yeah.
food for a certain amount of time, there's a bed, there are resources. So I'd like to point out that if you played the game, you probably know this, but the chapel is the point of no return. So if
Hmm.
you're worried about achievements, get them before you go here. This was very depressing to
This is
witness.
horrifying. Yeah. This really, I got goosebumps right now. Yeah.
Um, Again, because of the low poly resolution, it's not particularly graphic, but
Hmm.
which I think I love because it leaves so much to your imagination, which can actually be
Exactly.
more terrifying.
Yep.
But you go to the chapel and you hit the tape deck, and the chapel it's initially empty. When you hit the tape deck, all of a sudden you see these black figures of the different members of the flock, and there are flames.
Hmm.
So they committed mass suicide through group immolation or burning alive. And you hear Father James narrating. He's trying to comfort the flock and tells them not to be afraid. The doors are locked. No one's getting out. The narrator was part of a few people who handed out these cups of Quaalude mixed in lemonade. I don't know. I'm not sure what the proper official term of a Quaalude is. It's kind of, I don't know if it's a muscle relaxer or.
Yeah, I always think of that as like a painkiller. I know it was like popular as a recreational drug in the 1970s,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, I tend to think of it as like a painkiller, kind of like an opiate. I don't know if technically it's an opiate, but it's in that style, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's this one, but isn't that the one that some people put in drinks when they have ill intentions with women?
I don't know. I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Or is that roofie? Roofie.
Yes, yeah, that's like that's kind of the classic traditional thing there. But yeah, I tend to think of Quaaludes as like just a very strong painkiller. I think it preceded kind of like OxyContin and those various
Mm,
like the more modern things are those. But I think those kind of replaced Quaaludes.
okay. So I guess James is nice in that he's not going to make them suffer too much. I don't
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's back to the kind of coercive stuff again, right? Like maybe maybe this would have ended early if somebody was like, "Whoa, wait a second, this hurts," like running out, maybe people would have survived if they hadn't gone this route. So it is kind of like chemically coercive as opposed to
Oh,
charismatically coercive. But also like if one was to commit a self-immolation, I guess you'd probably want to have some painkillers.
unless you're there's a monk who did it, I think in Vietnam.
Oh, sure. There's a long history of that. That is there's actually that just happened in the U.S. back in. I mean, yes. Sorry, listeners, for bringing in sad current events, but back in the U.S. Only a few months ago, it was I believe a climate change protest.
Yes.
Yeah, it happened,
Yes.
and it's one of those things where it wasn't super heavily reported because there is a fear of people being inspired to do the same thing, which is understandable. Like you want to mitigate harm, and so that's like a journalistic ethics thing. But yeah, that just happened here. But there is a long history of self-immolation as protest, which, of course, Father James's experience falls definitively outside the realm of. He's not protesting anything.
No, no, it's gosh, it and that again, like how we were talking about the cleansing room where it's
Hmm.
terrifying and wonderful to see.
Right.
I think it's terrifying and wonderful to see people being able to conquer their instincts to get away, to not fight
Exactly.
back.
Yeah. Yeah. That same quote would kind of apply here.
But we learned that the narrator did not want to die, and
Hmm.
she remembered Father's temple and escaped, and it's the bunker behind the chapel, which that amazes me. She made it this far, and she's God.
Yeah.
So then you come across three journals. The last journal says you are a coward,
Hmm.
which I think the journals are more of her internal monologue rather than
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
the reflection on the tape decks. Okay, this part freaked me out. The door opens. There's a door, and it just opens by itself after you read the last journal entry.
This is so creepy. Like we move firmly into the realm of surreal horror here. Yeah.
And that I don't know if I mentioned it, but that was something I kept wondering, am I going to find a body? Am I going to
Hmm.
find people? And there's a lot of creaking whenever you're in different rooms, different locations like the community hall, and doors after you open them after a while they'll close by themselves. That freaked me out.
At least 50% of the time, I spun my character around to see if somebody had entered the room. Like you never stop being spooked by it. It's interesting that they use kind of the semiotics of horror here for a story that is psychologically horrifying, even though you don't have that sense of danger to your character avatar.
Hmm.
But they very much use kind of the language of horror in conveying what happened.
Yes, I love it. It's so
Yeah.
good. So you take your time, explore each room as you go through. It's a doomsday type setup. That's
Hmm.
what I thought of, like those end of the world apocalyptic type
Yeah,
doomsday
classic
preppers.
prepper bunker setup here. He's got his weapons down here too.
So the pathways get darker and more disturbing, and I absolutely adored this kind of storytelling. What did you
Hmm.
think, Chris?
I love this. This was the cherry on top of the game. Like you could not come up with a better climax to this story than what we go through here. And
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't expecting it at all, especially
Mm-mm.
because up to this point, this is kind of where we discover that the person who we're playing as is Lillian. Up to
Yes.
this point, I had thought that it was a detective. I had thought that maybe it was a historian or something. And it's as soon as you find that note calling you a coward, and then you start going through what is clearly not a real space here in the bunker, but you're opening doors and going through memories that did not take place here, that I realized, aha, I'm playing as Lillian. I'm seeing her process her trauma from her perspective. This is just brilliant. This you couldn't
that's
do
the
better
word.
than this. Yeah.
That is the exact word I would use. It was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's so creative, and oh, I just love it.
Yeah.
So, which, it's interesting to me that there was this bunker, but James did not go to use it himself.
Yeah, it's another one of those details that's not super well sketched in. We don't know why the cult decided to commit the mass suicide. It's a really odd bit of ambiguity to exist in this story, but we don't see what the precipitating incident was. Like, we know that
Mm-hmm.
they were amassing weapons. We know that they murdered Peyton. We know all of these little things that suggest that there could have been like a Waco style confrontation, or a Jonestown style confrontation, or like a millennialist, like, oh, it's just time for us to kill ourselves, which of course has happened with some cults, and we don't see that. Like, we don't actually get what the precipitating incident is, so it's very hard to say what Father James thought he would do with these bunkers. Like, maybe he just changed over time. Maybe this is where he thought he'd hole up. If the cult was attacked by the FBI or the ATF, and he just decided not to. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not sketched in, I feel like. Impression of why this is here?
The only thing I could think is that he had the mindset of, well, now that Peyton's gone, the FBI is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely going to be coming to this ranch, and
Mm-hmm.
you're going to take me dead. I'm not going alive.
Yeah.
And my flock members are not going alive either.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder I wonder if the self-immolation and the weapons accumulation are kind of at odds with each other. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if it's kind of a result of the game developer wanting to incorporate elements from different real world cults that maybe don't exactly dovetail. And so we do get an element of a cult that was going to fight when the world came for it, as well as a cult that was going to commit mass suicide when the world came for it. Those do feel a little bit at odds for me. I'm not sure what the weapons were for if Father James just decided to commit mass suicide anyway. But I guess that's how Jonestown went. Like Jim
Yeah.
Jones had his people assassinate like U.S. politicians who came to visit,
Mm-hmm.
and then also commit mass suicide. So I guess they aren't entirely at odds.
It's probably a sense of pride. Like, maybe it goes back to the honor suicide with,
Right. He wanted to die on his own terms.
yes.
Yeah.
But that is a good point. There really isn't this clear explanation of why now, or maybe, I mean, I'm being a little silly. Maybe everybody was really bad at using those semi-automatic weapons. He
Yeah.
didn't think they'd be able to stand off very well.
Exactly. Yeah. The testing revealed some unfortunate truths about the flock.
Yeah, please don't give me a semi-automatic rifle.
Yeah.
Be more afraid of it than using it. But like Chris was talking about the storytelling of the events, you walk through these different doors, and the first section, it'll be like a cross with some pictures, and then more crosses will be added. And there's one scene where it's tons of crosses with red light. I was very freaked out by that.
Real spooky.
It
Yeah.
was very spooky. So the first one is you see scenes of Lillian being interrogated by a detective in regards to the fire. And she talks about people's last moments. She's struggling. The detective's trying to pull information from her, but she's dealing with survivor's guilt, like we talked about.
Yeah. This is clearly right after the suicide happened.
Mm-hmm. The next one is very poignant, I think. It looks like a little living room set up, and she's talking with her dad, and he's pleading with her. He's like, what did we do? What led you to join this cult? I don't understand. Like, he's worried, but the way he's talking to her is probably not the best way to talk to someone in that
Right.
mental state. He's not rude, but He's just
It's
flabbergasted.
understandable but sad. Yeah,
Yeah.
I teared up a bit at this. This scene with Lillian talking with her dad is really pretty heartbreaking.
Hmm.
Even though you can tell like he's a person who loves her and she's a person who loves him, but they can't understand each other here, and he's a bit harsher than you would hope that somebody would be with somebody who'd gone through such a trauma.
And I do want to point out when you're going through these scenes, you don't see anybody, you just see props.
Yeah,
That you
another
don't.
great directorial choice.
I love it. You just see the scenery. So then there's a scene with a therapist, there's a couch, there's a chair. Lillian has been struggling with survivor's guilt and possibly thoughts of suicide. And
Mm.
I love they address that she went to see a therapist.
Yes.
Hmm. Um, this one I thought was really clever. There's a bar, and you're wondering, a bar? Why are we going to a bar?
Mm-hmm.
She is talking to a gentleman named Tim. They're obviously on a date.
Mm-hmm.
I loved what he said about work. Okay. So he talks about his job and he talks about how it's almost like a fanatical religion
Mm-hmm.
because he's expected to do certain things and he makes very light jokes about it.
Yeah.
What did you think about that scene?
Yeah, I was going to ask you the same question. This feels like it could read two different ways. One is that maybe Tim is being a little bit accidentally crass and
Mhm.
relating something that is kind of more mundane work with something that is very horrifying, which is a real lived cult experience. And we all know people who have done that sort of thing, like made a
Mhm.
comment in jest, but it was a bit insensitive, in retrospect. But there's another reading of this that maybe is saying that what Tim is saying actually could be applicable, that there is this element of like self-harm through overwork. I'm inclined to the first reading. It's both simpler and it doesn't feel like this work really is about commenting on labor. Like it
Mhm.
feels like this is so tightly tied to the specifics of cult that making it kind of making having a bit in the ending that turns it into an allegory for overwork feels a little trite. But
Oh,
I can see that too. Like it's very hard to say. I'd be curious to hear what the developer has to say on that.
I love that. I didn't even think of that second part.
I could see it either way. I could see it either way. What did you think about this though?
I I was kind of like, ooh, he has
Yeah,
no
yeah.
idea. Oh my gosh, because I've flippantly said, oh, this is just like a cult, all these people who are
Yep.
obsessed with whatever, just in my everyday talk. And I don't mean it. I don't, but I could see how that could be very insensitive because I guess we assume that we don't know anybody who's joined a cult, that it's almost like they're the others. We don't.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of like smaller scale things like that in life. Where somebody makes kind of a little comment because they don't know something about
Hmm.
somebody else. And this happens to be like a really large scale one.
Hmm.
But I mean, I can just think of like describing some like describing some being like, oh, this is like uh like cancerous or something like that, and it turns
Hmm.
out the person you're talking to is like recovering from cancer or something like that, and you thinking like, gosh, that was a terrible thing to say. Like, in
Yes.
a different context it wouldn't have been harmful, but in this context it was sort of insensitive, and yeah, so that's how I read this too. I'm with you.
Yes. Yes. And I'd like to know how long after 1993 this is taking place.
Yeah, it's impossible to say, isn't it? Yeah, it's very hard to tell.
We don't, because they don't outright say, okay, this is when Lillian talked to the detective. This is when she
No.
talked to her dad. This is when she saw her therapist. This is when she's going on the date. Because I can't imagine her going on a date like the week after
Mm-mm.
going.
No, this is not definitely. It's probably sometime decently after that, eh?
Hmm. So the next scene is a scene with Lillian's car, which is the car we saw at the beginning. And there's a voicemail, A plus on the realistic voicemail voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Please leave a message. Tim is trying to call her. He's worried about her. He can't reach her. You're wondering what's going on. Were you worried that, did you have any kind of thoughts about this, or did you think?
Yeah, she deletes the voicemail. She doesn't respond to it, and it's that bit where she deletes it. My heart sank when she deleted the voicemail, And I was thinking, like, oh my goodness, is she going to commit suicide due to all of this survivor's guilt and what she's gone through? Like, I really had this kind of heart sinking moment when we see her delete the voicemail.
Oh, so that's the last scene. You can turn around and you can leave the bunker, and it goes back to being normal. There are no
Mhm.
more creepy crosses with red lights behind them.
Yes.
But when you see the chapel, it's present day, so it's burned.
Hmm.
It's in shambles. Lillian starts reflecting on her time in the cult. Was there anything that she said or anything that happened in this instance that stuck out to you?
No, funny enough, I just played this section last night and nothing about this monologue sticks out to me. It struck me as her reminiscing about a lot of the stuff that we had already seen with more
Hmm.
specifics. So this particular bit didn't really stick with me. How about you?
I noticed the dawn because you
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
see that's what stuck out to me. I think because we put the puzzle pieces together, so now we're just absorbing.
Right.
We know so much already, but then you see the dawn breaking over the ranch. So her cell phone rings when you walk outside of the chapel, and it's Tim. He's worried about her, obviously.
Right.
So I'm assuming they're in a relationship or married, something. They're together.
Right.
They have a strong bond. And she says there are some things that she needs to tell him. And then the phone disappears. You do actually see the cell phone. That is, you don't see your hand, but you see the cell phone pop up. I thought that
Yeah, that
was
was a
kind of cool.
surprising choice because I thought this was all taking place in the mid 1990s, and that cell phone, I think it's a smartphone, isn't it? Like
Yeah, it looks like an
it
iPhone.
yeah, it's interesting that it makes us realize that this journey that we've been going on is actually taking place probably potentially 20 years after the events of Perfect Heaven.
So she just graduated from college. She was probably in her early 20s, so she's probably
Mhm.
in her early 40s,
Yep.
mid 40s by now.
Yeah.
And so after she talks with Tim, there's a repeat of the very same dialogue from the very opening of the game. I'm not going to read it again. It's pretty long, but it's where she's talking about I met Anne first, waiting for the
Hmm.
bus, blah blah blah.
Exactly.
And then it goes to the credits. So that's Sagebrush. That's
Hmm.
so Chris, what would you like to say about this game?
I thought this game was extraordinary. I'm so happy. I'm happy that it's as short and tight as it is. I really wish more games were shorter, and I think this is just the right length to make the impact that it wants to make, to say what it has to say. It gives just enough information about all of the characters to make them specific, not archetypes, but also leaves enough ambiguous that you can fill in some of the details yourself. Like some of the less important details aren't there, and I think something being a little underwritten is sometimes better than it being overwritten, as long as it can still convey its central point, which this does. Um, as far as like minor drawbacks, it's very dark, as we talked about. It's a little hard to see sometimes. I think that is still probably the right creative choice for this
Mhm.
because it contributes to the mood and what's going on with Lillian's perspective. But it does just on a purely mechanical level make it hard to play sometimes. Similarly, the items being hard to interact with using a joystick. Those are some really minor kind of nitpicky things. But outside of that, like this is kind of a 10 out of 10 game. Like it accomplishes exactly what it sets out to do, which is like this gets across to me the terrifying realities of how people end up in these situations and what the consequences are to them, not just in terms of that last terrible self-immolation, but what they all went through in the process. Like this is just
Oh,
it's heartbreaking to read about what these people went through. And it's sympathetic. It's not it doesn't make them out to be caricatures or evil or anything like that. Like Father James comes off very badly, but pretty much everybody else in this, no matter what horrible things they did, you understand how they ended up there. It is a
mhm.
cascading series of tragedies, and I think it conveys that perfectly.
You know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What about you, Celeste?
This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Not so much with cults, but I've read about it on Reddit. I have male friends who make me wonder this. Why do there, there seems to be a huge sense of loneliness. And I'm not saying it's just now in 2022. It's obviously been the case forever. I mean, these cults have been around before I was even born. But what can we do as a society to help people? I mean, I know that people, first of all, people have to recognize that there's a problem, that they're missing something. They have to want to get help. They have to have the resources. But I've had male friends open up to me, especially if they don't have a partner, they'll ask my advice. And as much as I'm happy to help them, it also makes me worry for them.
Yeah, this is such a huge problem. I have no idea how that kind of thing gets fixed. Particularly, it's very hard to fix on a macro scale. Like what impacts a sense of loneliness, what impacts a person being on their own or subject to these kind of malign forces, be they cults or substance abuse or militias or violent internet communities, whatever the case may be. There are any number of things that are kind of waiting to take advantage of somebody who feels lonely or directionless. And there are plainly people who experience that and come out the other side healthily. People certainly like religious organizations are a great place that people go to find a sense of belonging and do good in the world, to building houses and helping their communities and finding this sense of place there. Or it's hardly unique to religion, but political groups, non-toxic political groups, folks who want to work, mutual aid organizations want to fundraise for their communities, who want to try to protect one another and lift each other up and everything. There are lots of good community outlets that bring people together. I'm just spitballing here. I have no idea. I confront this as often as every other person I was going to say America, but the world. This is a problem the world over. This isn't even unique to our culture. Loneliness is a really tough nut to crack. It's it is a global phenomenon, I guess, born largely of the fact that we're kind of communal creatures, right? Like humans as a species are community driven. And when we don't have that community, our health suffers for it.
100%. And someone has to be willing to step out and seek community, right? Unfortunately. And that's half of the battle. I think a lot of people are very shy and maybe they don't have enough confidence. So I guess the thing I want to say is be kind to people. You really don't know what people are going through. I'm not saying if someone's being cruel to you, you have to let them keep punching you. But my mom was a kindergarten teacher for 33 years, and she always would say the kids who misbehaved and acted the most unloving were the ones who needed the most love.
Absolutely.
Again, not excusing them from terrorizing another student, but it would give her she was able to approach the situation with a little bit more compassion and wanting to help them.
It's a fine distinction between empathy and sympathy. It is important to be able to be empathetic and helpful, even if one doesn't agree with the actions of another person.
Yes, absolutely. Chris, did you notice we have Ed popping in virtually?
I noticed that he has a bunch of bullet points down here in the notes. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Ed.
I don't know if he can hear us. I guess he's not on the recording, so he can't hear us. Maybe he'll hear us later. But I see we got some notes from him here. I'm sad I didn't get to meet Ed. I've listened to him on so many shows.
Well, we'll have to have you on another episode.
Exactly, sure. Yeah.
But he brought some bullets up, and maybe he can talk about them. I'll just go through them quickly. He said it was an interesting game for a walking sim. Since it deals with a cult, he was surprised by how the story was put together. The sad part was the emotionless narration that made it feel dull and eye-rolling. Ed, that's a hot take.
Ed, I disagree with you so much.
I wish you were here to tell us why you thought it was emotionless. The clues to solving some of the puzzles were downright unfair, specifically the farm puzzle. With no way to keep track of notes, you can easily be searching for minutes trying to solve the solution. Those are some of my negatives.
Yeah, just I don't want to talk over Ed here, so to speak, but that is an observation that didn't occur to me until he wrote this in here. Is that having a thing in the menu that collected the notes would have
Mm,
been a nice addition to this.
that
Maybe
is
it's a programming quirk.
That's a great point. Yeah, like I think in Resident Evil you can go back and look at the different notes that you collect.
Yes, like 99% of the time, and why this is in my mind is that I did play one Resident Evil, I want to say, where they didn't have that, and it drove me batty. I got so frustrated that I knew that I don't, shucks, I think it's Resident Evil 6 or maybe
Okay.
Resident Evil Revelations. It's one of the 2010s ones. It doesn't collect the notes, which is a real problem when you need to refer to them for puzzle solutions, as Ed has noted here with Sagebrush.
Great observation from both of you. I didn't even think about saving the notes. That's
Yeah.
great. To say the least, the game could have been longer if they built on characters and had various voices to add to the other names. I know it was going for a Heaven's Gate feel, and like we mentioned earlier, it's a one-man show, so he was limited on the voice acting. But I understand.
Sure.
He shocked no one who was there actually read the Bible or knew of it to question the insanity Father James was preaching.
Good point, Ed. Not a lot
All
of Bible scholars in the Perfect Heaven cult.
I guess not. All in all, I did enjoy my time with it. It just could have been more. With that, everyone, I love you all and I'll see you next time. But he has an editorial for more opinions on this game because it's a question he wants to ask is why do cults need people in their older age to function? And is it because of their comprehension of logic or wanting to belong? What separates this from gang culture? Uh, Perfect Heaven seems to be a mixture of ages.
Yeah, I tend to think of cults being oriented towards younger folks. I could be wrong about that, but there's no real reason for me to have come to that conclusion. I tend to think of cults as a rule being like Perfect Heaven in terms of pulling in people who are rudderless or directionless or lack
Mm-hmm.
community and that sort of thing. And I guess I just tend to think of more settled people as having more of those things later in
Mm-hmm.
life. I don't think that's true. I think particularly they're, again, kind of to pull in to pull from a wider pool, like there is a huge problem of like the elderly experiencing loneliness and being separated from all of those community ties. However, I think that uh, like cults inherently are very mobile. They require you generally to move to them. Like there are a bunch of these weird little logistical reasons I think that they don't tend to attract people who are less mobile. That said, the gang culture thing I think is a really good note here because I would say that is very much along the same lines as far as attracting folks who might otherwise not have a sense of community. Like gang culture also pulls in folks who, maybe they have a tough family situation. Maybe they don't have a lot of friends outside of that experience. It gives people a sense of belonging. Like there are a lot of good reasons why people join up with gangs, and so I think there is a lot of overlap there. Kind of like the militia group thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like militia groups are very gang-like as well. It's cults, militia groups, gangs. Like these are all terrorist cells. Even these are all scenarios where there is kind of a malign influence acting on the loneliness of individuals.
Very well said, Chris. Thank you for that. That's There's a quote, I think it's an African proverb that says, a child not accepted by the warmth of the village will burn it down, I think.
Yeah, woof. I've heard. Yeah, I want to say I've heard that before. That is a well observed proverb.
And I think that's something that scares me because even though I don't work in a school,
Hmm.
with things going on in the news, sometimes I worry just going to Walmart or my local grocery store. It kind of freaks me out that there could be someone who I don't know and who doesn't know me who's just hell bent on making other people miserable and could harm me or my loved ones.
Yeah, profoundly terrifying. I think that's something that certainly we all live with in the United States is that the fear of that kind of thing. And so much of that, again, is born out of a lack of community, a lack of belonging, and a desire to lash out with no other kind of outlet. Like that person could join a cult, they could join a terrorist organization, or they could lash out through just singular violence against their community. That loneliness does create all kinds of really, really scary consequences.
We got really deep.
Sagebrush makes you think.
It really does, and it brings up a lot.
The best $10 you could spend on the Switch eShop.
I fully agree. So I guess this would be my PSA. Reach out to your friends and your loved ones. I mean, you can't save the world, and it's very easy to get a savior complex where you feel like, oh, I have to help everybody. I have to help this person. I'm this person. It burns
you out. Yeah.
It really does. If you feel burned out, or if you feel like you need help, the United States just released 988, I believe is the number.
Yeah, sure enough. Yeah. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
I hope we got that number right.
I hope.
Look it up. Yeah, listeners, look it up.
Oh, okay. Yes, 988. It's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Yeah. You don't have to call it strictly for suicide. It's if you're feeling emotional distress, you don't have to call 911. This is meant to connect you with counselors, and they can provide other resources. But I know it's hard, and especially if you are someone who struggles with like a sense of pride, or you're embarrassed. Mm-hmm. You're not alone.
Everybody belongs somewhere. Yeah, you aren't born into this world not belonging anywhere. Like you're important to somebody, and you're probably important to a lot of people.
Yes. So if you feel like you're involved with something very dangerous to yourself or others, or you're struggling to feel your own sense of self-worth, I know it's hard to see. I've dealt with bad feelings before, right, but yeah. Things do get better. Please reach out to someone. If it's a friend, a family member, somebody, so that if they can't help you directly, they could at least maybe connect you with someone.
Yeah, agreed. Those resources are there, and something that I think when folks are in a better place where they are maybe able to get outside themselves, obviously not a person in crisis, but find ways to connect with your community. One of the best ways to find a sense of belonging is finding a way to help other people in your community. You build a lot of bonds there, and be it a mutual aid organization, be it some kind of like local charity work, be it a church community, or like a synagogue, or really anything, any kind of. There are just a lot of opportunities to kind of contribute to your local community, and in the process increase your own sense of belonging. It's a good way to get outside yourself.
Thank you for that, Chris. Is there anything else you'd like to say about
No, I don't think so. No. It's a heavy game. It's a lot to take in, but I think it's a really valuable perspective improving piece. It does what the best art does, which is that it gets you outside of your own experience and helps you understand the experiences of others.
We're all on this spinning rock together. We might as well get along and help one another.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, where can people find you if they'd like to connect with you?
Yeah, good question. I host the Franchise Festival podcast with my co-hosts Spencer and Hamilton. The Franchise Festival podcast has its own website at franchisefestivalpodcast.com. It's also on Twitter under the handle @franchise_fest. Franchise Festival was taken. And I am on Twitter at the handle @Brakeman90. That's BRAKEMAN 90. And I'd be happy to connect with anybody on there.
I think people should, honestly. You post some very thought-provoking tweets and some fun, lighthearted ones. I really enjoy the Franchise Festival podcast. And I notice you're very active with interacting with people on Twitter. You like to encourage people and uplift them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Isn't that the best part of it? Like, people get down on social media, and that's understandable. There's a lot of toxicity there, but it's also a really great opportunity to, try and make everybody feel good about themselves. Like people are putting themselves out there and, creating content, and, it's to our discussion, a nice place to, as you said, uplift people.
Twitter is how we met.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sorry we talked before for half an hour, and then
yeah, don't worry about it.
And good luck with the recording tonight with Franchise Festival. That's
Thank you.
So exciting. And everyone, you can follow me on Twitter at FairyCrypt, and you can also go to bossrush.net to listen to other, I've almost said 1v1, but that is another podcast episode, other Talk the Walk episodes. And we look forward to hearing what you think about Sagebrush. So until next time, we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.